everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well. I apologise in advance if I do sound nasally at all throughout this video, but I'm getting over a little bit of a cold and I've still got a bit of congestion left over from it, so if I do sound nasally then that's why. But today I wanted to make a video discussing something that I have seen a lot of people in the visually impaired community talk about recently, and I really wanted to discuss it as well, and it's my thoughts on the Bird Box challenge. Now, I have seen a lot of YouTubers and bloggers make some really fantastic content and really add some really insightful views into the conversation about the Bird Box challenge. So I might be repeating some of what they have said, but I really wanted to discuss this with my audience and share my thoughts on this challenge and also on the film itself. In December of 2018, Netflix released a film called Bird Box, starring Sandra Bullock as Mallory Hayes. The film is a post-apocalyptic film set in America about a world where these paranormal entities have taken over the world, and when people see these entities, they are either driven to take their own life or to force other people to look at these entities. Spoiler alert, and the way that these characters were driven to survive in this film was to ensure that they never looked at these entities. So of course when they were in the house, that would include making sure that all the blinds were down and that none of the outside world was visible to them from their house. And then later on they were driven to wearing blindfolds so that they lived in total darkness, so that they never had to look at these entities unless of course someone forced them to remove the blindfold and see these entities by force. But they were driven to survival by essentially simulating blindness. Interestingly, throughout the entire film, when these characters had to negotiate the world wearing blindfolds, I was just sat there saying, if this happened in real life, people with visual impairments would be employed so quickly to teach these sighted people how to live in a non-sighted world so they could survive. So literally I was thinking to myself, visually impaired people would be the most strongest people to survive in this world because they would be the least vulnerable and the least susceptible. And it turns out my premise was right. Spoiler alert, because by the end of the film, Mallory Hayes and her two children end up at this mystery location that they have been trying to get to throughout the film when we see these flashbacks until it arrives at the present day. And this mystery location turns out to be a school for visually impaired people. Now, this school has become a safe haven and a stronghold for people who are seeking refuge from these entities to find safety. I thought that was fantastic because it was where the script writers had enabled the visually impaired characters to become the stronger characters in the film in a plausible and believable way. Now, something that happened very soon after the film was aired was that people developed a challenge on YouTube for it. The challenge is known as the Bird Box challenge, and it essentially involves people blindfolding themselves and filming themselves doing daily tasks wearing a blindfold and making it into the Bird Box challenge. And of course there are other challenges that are in a sense a sensory deprivational experience. For example, you've got things like the mirrorless makeup challenge, you've got the what's in my mouth challenge, and they involve doing things without looking, and it involves people having to use their other senses. Charities themselves will do experiences at events like fundraisers where they will offer sensory deprivation experiences to people who want to experience what it's like to live with sight loss. For example, guide dogs at their events will do things like a sensory deprivation tunnel where you have to walk down a darkened tunnel to see what it's like to live with a visual impairment. Or at events, the RNIB will have an experience where you can use different glasses which will simulate what it's like to live with different eye conditions like macular degeneration or diabetic retinopathy. Of course, it's an interesting thing to think about what it's like to live with a sensory disability, or to think about how you would live in a situation where you are deprived of one of your dominant senses. So I understand why people would find this challenge interesting, but people are taking it too far. Now, this challenge worries me, and the reason it worries me is because of the things that I have already seen people doing for the Bird Box challenge here on YouTube. For example, there was one extreme case where someone drove a car blindfolded and they crashed their car and they crashed into another car in the process. I've seen people walking up moving escalators, I have seen people crossing the road, I have seen people doing all sorts of different things for the Bird Box Challenge. And that's the worrying thing about it, is that YouTubers are putting themselves into risky, dangerous situations. It's got so bad, in fact, that YouTube themselves are even contemplating banning this challenge because of the extremities that people are going to create content. And Netflix themselves have even released a statement asking their viewers not to try and simulate any of the things that they did in the film for the Bird Box Challenge. We are now living in an age of clickbait here on YouTube, where YouTubers are resorting to clickbait to try and beat the algorithm and to gain more views and to be higher on the watch page. And what might happen is that a YouTuber might see one person make a video for the challenge that involves them doing one thing, and then they might try to outdo them. The thing that you have to remember is that this film has a strong theme of sight loss, so you cannot exclude the voices of visually impaired people from this discussion. One big thing that a lot of people with visual impairment have said, and I will repeat now, is that having a visual impairment means that you have to often work a lot harder to do daily tasks than other people. You have to learn how to do a lot of things that people with full sight would be able to do a lot more easier. So for example, being able to cross the road, or being able to use stairs or escalators, or be able to use public transport, or to be able to use a phone, is a lot more of a lengthy process, because you have to learn how to use certain techniques. Like, for example, when you use a phone, you might have to learn how to use voiceover. When you cross the road, you have to really learn how to, just by hearing alone, know if there's traffic coming. Or if you're using stairs or escalators, you have to learn techniques of being able to use them safely without either risking your own safety or the safety of somebody else who might be using them as well. So the fact is that visual impairment, not an easy thing. It's not something where you can just instantly be at one with the world without sight and feel comfortable navigating it independently. It's a very lengthy process, and there are actually people who are qualified and whose job it is to try and help people with visual impairments to orientate successfully, and they will either be called orientation workers or habilitation workers. So the fact is that it's a very lengthy process, and it takes people a long time to get to grips with that, whether you lose a sight or whether you've been born with a visual impairment. And in conjunction with that, a lot of us will use visual aids and equipment to help us to be able to do things successfully and independently. Some of us might use long canes or symbol canes or guide dogs, phones with access features on it, you know, actual specific technology that's been developed for people with visual impairments to be able to go out independently and do things. So it is also a case of the fact that we actually use technology to be able to do things independently, and there are also things that we have to have alongside the training that we've had to be able to do things independently as well. A lot of people with visual impairments cannot drive, and of course people with very severe visual impairments cannot drive either. And the only time we can drive is when we go on a specific experience called the blind drive, which is where you'll drive a car in a safe, secure location with an instructor who's been taught how to enable you to be able to have experience of driving a car if you don't have sight. You have to remember that these people in this film were doing it because they were in a post-apocalyptic world where they had to try and fight for survival. They didn't really have much choice. People who are sighted are putting themselves into the polar opposite of what they're used to. They are taking every single bit of their vision away and trying to negotiate the world without vision, and doing very dangerous tasks that a lot of us with visual impairments take years to learn. There's another problem with the Bird Box Challenge, and that's the way that it will portray the sight loss community and the way that it will cause others to perceive people with visual impairments. And it can have quite a derogatory effect on the sight loss community. There are two problems with this. The first problem is that the Bird Box Challenge can inadvertently make people with visual impairments seem comical and useless. And the reason for this is because when you simulate a visual impairment with a blindfold, and you know you are a fully sighted YouTuber and you go into a situation and you simulate a visual impairment and you try and do everyday tasks without any sight whatsoever, you're going to appear funny when you can't do these tasks. And people who watch these videos and see this and it's not done in a sensitive way will find it funny, and they might therefore draw comparisons between yourself and a person with no sight. But then there's also another problem, and the problem is that the challenge can also make people with visual impairments look like they're lying. And that's because when you see someone who doesn't do the challenge as well and they can't perform a daily task as they usually would with sight because they are in a different situation without any sight, when a viewer might see a person with a visual impairment, for example, cross the road or walk upstairs and they do it more successfully, that person will think, maybe that person is lying because I saw this video and that person wasn't able to do it as well as the person with a visual impairment can. And that's a problem because it makes the visual impairment community look as if we are lying when we are able to do a task well, because of the fact that we've done it for so long and we've developed skills to be able to do these tasks. They might assume that we are lying because of the fact that we live with sight loss well and that we are good at living with sight loss, which is a problem, which is a big problem, because the fact is that a lot of us always face assumptions as people with visual impairments that we are lying when we live independently and when we live successfully with a visual impairment. To add to this, when people think that we're lying, Bird Box Challenge is not entirely representative of people who live with visual impairments and the way that we see. 93% of people who have visual impairments have some degree of vision left. So it's actually a really small percentage of people who have visual impairments who have no sight whatsoever. So therefore you have to remember that the Bird Box Challenge does not represent us as a whole and the way that we see the world. There are so many other things that you could do. For one example, you could have a list of items that you had to try and find in your home without looking and see if you can find them just by touch alone. And I think that would be an interesting video to watch, and I think it would allow you to have an insightful and interesting perception into what it might be like to live without sight. YouTubers who might do this particular challenge need to really listen to the collective opinions of the sight loss community who have all spoke up in response to this challenge, and really need to listen to what we are saying as a collective and unified voice and what we have said. And I think they also need to remember the amount of influence and responsibility they have as a content creator and as a YouTuber who has an audience of people who might be influenced by what they are seeing. I think that YouTubers who might go about doing this challenge really need to be responsible for themselves and their safety, for the safety of other people, to be responsible for their own audience, and also to be sensitive to the visually impaired community. So that concludes my video today. I really hope you found it interesting. Do let me know in the comments what your thoughts on the Bird Box Challenge are, or your thoughts on the film. I really would like to know. And I really hope you enjoyed it. Do have a lovely day. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe to my channel if you're new, and also be sure to click the notification bell down below to receive updates when I post new videos, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye!